On the stark, dusty landscape of Mars, the human outpost buzzed with activity. The crew of varied scientists and engineers, all part of Earth's first interstellar exploration team, were gathered in the main hub, a dome-shaped structure reinforced to withstand the harsh Martian environment. Isaac, the team's linguist, was deep in conversation with Captain Jonathan Pierce, the mission commander, when the alarm sounded. It was a signal they had been anticipating yet dreading. Contact from an unknown origin. "Isaac, you better come take a look at this," Jonathan called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the room. Rushing over, Isaac leaned in close to the monitor. The screen displayed an intricate series of pulses and patterns, definitely structured, unmistakably deliberate. "What do you make of this, Isaac?" Jonathan asked, his eyes not leaving the screen. "It's structured, rhythmic. Language, maybe. It's nothing like we've ever seen," Isaac replied, his mind racing with possibilities. Dr. Emily Zhao, the mission's lead scientist, joined them, her expression a mix of excitement and caution. "Could this be what we've been looking for? Proof that we're not alone?" "Potentially," Isaac said, adjusting the monitor to better analyze the data. "I need to run this through some linguistic models. See if there's a repetitive pattern that matches any linguistic structures we know." As Isaac worked, the rest of the team clustered around, each member speculating about the signal's origins and implications. Michael, an engineer, piped up, "Could just be a comet passing by emitting some weird frequencies, right?" "Not with that consistency, Mike," Jonathan countered, his gaze still fixed on the data flowing in. "This was directed at us. It's too focused, too intentional." For hours, Isaac and the team decoded fragments of the signal, slowly piecing together the syntax of a message. As the Martian sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the control room, Isaac finally cracked the last sequence. "It's an invitation," Isaac announced, stepping back from the terminal, a mix of awe and apprehension in his voice. "Coordinates to a location in space, just outside our solar system. They want to meet." "Meet? As in face-to-face?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Jonathan nodded slowly. "Looks like we've got ourselves a rendezvous with the unknown. Prep the shuttle, we're going on a little trip beyond the asteroid belt." "Isaac, you're with me." Emily, coordinate with Earth Command. Mike, get the tech ready. We need all systems at 100%. The team sprung into action, each member focused on their tasks with renewed vigor. Isaac felt a surge of excitement. This was why they were here, after all, to discover, to explore. As the preparations continued, Isaac turned to Jonathan. "What if they're nothing like us?" Jonathan clapped a reassuring hand on Isaac's shoulder. "Then we do what humans have always done. We learn, we adapt, and we find common ground. After all, that's the heart of exploration, isn't it?" Together, they looked out at the stars, the weight of their upcoming journey settling in. The silent stars were silent no more, and Earth's silent ambassadors were ready to answer the call. The small crew aboard the shuttle Pioneer felt the weight of silence as they hurtled through space, away from Mars and towards the coordinates provided by the mysterious signal. The cabin was cramped, utilitarian, designed for function over comfort, filled with the constant hum of the engines and the soft beeps of the instruments. Isaac sat beside Captain Jonathan Pierce, who was piloting the shuttle alongside Michael, their chief engineer. The anticipation was palpable, each man lost in his own thoughts about what they might find at the meeting point. Michael broke the silence, his voice a welcome distraction. "So, Isaac, you ever think you'd be acting as humanity's first official alien greeter?" Isaac chuckled, shaking his head. "Honestly, I always thought if we met aliens, they'd come to us. I never imagined we'd be the ones knocking on their door." Jonathan glanced back at them, a small smile playing on his lips. "Well, make sure you choose your words carefully, Isaac. First impressions count, even more so when they're interstellar." The shuttle's navigation system beeped, signaling their approach to the designated coordinates. As they neared, a massive spacecraft came into view, dwarfing their shuttle in both size and design. Its surface was sleek, metallic, with patterns of lights that pulsed rhythmically. "Holy," Michael muttered, staring out the window. "That's no ordinary ship. That's a masterpiece of engineering." Jonathan adjusted their course, bringing them in line with the docking bay that was opening before them. "All right, team, let's get ready to dock. Isaac, you're up as soon as we're secure. Remember, we're here to communicate, learn, and establish a friendly rapport." The docking process was smoother than any of them had anticipated, guided by the alien ship's advanced technology. Once docked, they gathered at the airlock, donning their translation units, devices designed to facilitate real-time communication between different languages. The airlock door hissed open, revealing a delegation of aliens waiting for them. They were tall, slender, with iridescent skin that shimmered under the ship's lights. Their eyes were large, expressive, and their movements graceful, almost floating as they approached. Isaac stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hello, I'm Isaac, and these are my colleagues, Captain Jonathan Pierce and Engineer Michael Smith. We come in peace and hope to learn from each other." One of the aliens, who appeared to be their leader, nodded slowly. His translation device emitted a soft, melodic voice. "Welcome, Isaac, Jonathan, Michael. I am Cyril, this is my advisor, Jael. We greet you in peace and curiosity. Your journey here speaks volumes of your courage and desire for knowledge." Jonathan responded, his tone respectful. "Thank you, Cyril. We are honored to meet you and look forward to sharing our cultures and histories." Michael, ever the engineer, couldn't help but ask about the ship's design. "Cyril, your ship is unlike anything we've ever seen. Would you mind telling us about your technology?" Jael, the advisor, answered, "We would be pleased to exchange knowledge about our technologies. There is much we can learn from each other." As they walked through the corridors of the alien ship, Isaac felt a sense of awe. The walls were adorned with art that seemed to tell the story of their civilization. A civilization so different yet so familiar in its expressions of life and community. Cyril guided them into a room that resembled a conference area, where they could talk more comfortably. "Let us sit, talk, and build the foundation for a lasting friendship between our peoples." Isaac knew that this was just the beginning, but as he looked around at his companions and their hosts, he felt a surge of hope. Here, in the vastness of space, they were taking the first steps toward understanding not just another species, but also themselves. The alien ship was nothing short of extraordinary. It operated with seamless grace, blending technology and organic design in ways Isaac, Michael, and Jonathan could hardly fathom. Yet, as the days passed on the ship, their mission began to feel heavier. Earth's silence loomed like a storm cloud over their efforts. "Isaac, anything new?" Jonathan asked, his voice strained as he leaned against the console in their quarters. Isaac shook his head, staring at his tablet. "Still nothing. No pings from Mars, no updates from Earth. It's like we're shouting into a void." Michael was slouched in a chair nearby, absent-mindedly twirling a small wrench. "It doesn't make sense. Earth has redundancies for its redundancies. Even if something catastrophic happened, we'd still get some sort of emergency signal. But nothing." Jonathan straightened, pacing the small room. "We need answers, and fast. Cyril and Jael offered to help us decode long-range data anomalies. Let's take them up on it. Sitting here speculating won't do us any good." The three men made their way to the ship's central operations room, where Cyril and Jael were already working. The room was dim, illuminated by holographic screens displaying streams of alien and human data side by side. "Cyril," Jonathan began, his tone direct but respectful, "we need to focus all resources on understanding what's happening to Earth. Can your systems help us scan for anomalies in our solar system?" Cyril turned to them, his expression calm but curious. "Of course, we have already begun analysis based on the information you shared. However, your solar system is unique. The level of activity within it complicates clear observation." Jael gestured to the holograms. "We've detected something unusual, a sudden spike in solar energy output from your star. It's brief but significant enough to have disrupted communications. Michael leaned over one of the displays. Wait, you're saying the sun caused this? Like a solar storm? Cyril nodded. Precisely. Your star is highly volatile compared to many we've studied. This event appears to have affected your planet's magnetic field and satellite infrastructure. Jonathan frowned. A solar storm could knock out satellites. Sure, but it wouldn't explain total silence. Earth has ground-based systems that should have kicked in. Isaac rubbed his temples, frustration creeping in. What if it's not just the satellites? What if the storm triggered something larger? Maybe even forced an evacuation. The room went quiet, each of them turning the possibility over in their minds. An evacuation, Michael said, breaking the silence. That would explain why there's no one responding. If they had to leave Earth, they wouldn't be sitting around waiting for a phone call. Jail's holographic interface lit up as he manipulated the data. We can search for traces of mass movement ships, large-scale energy signatures. If your people relocated, there would be signs. Do it, Jonathan said firmly. If there's a trail, we need to follow it. As Jail worked, Cyril approached Isaac. Your concern for your people is admirable. But tell me, Isaac, what will you do if your home has truly been abandoned? Isaac hesitated, the question striking a chord deep within him. If that's the case, then we find them. Wherever they are, we'll find them and figure out how to bring them back. Earth isn't just a place. It's who we are. Cyril tilted his head, considering Isaac's words. Interesting. Many civilizations would simply adapt to a new home. Your attachment to your origin is unique. Before Isaac could respond, Jail's voice interrupted. I've found something. They all gathered around the holographic display as Jail pointed to a series of energy signatures. These patterns are consistent with high-capacity vessels leaving your planet's orbit. The trajectories suggest they headed toward the outer planets of your solar system. Michael let out a low whistle. They evacuated to the outer planets? That's not exactly hospitable territory. Maybe they didn't have a choice, Isaac said. If the solar storm hit hard enough, staying on Earth might not have been an option. Jonathan straightened, his military training kicking in. Then that's our next stop. Cyril, can your ship take us there? Cyril nodded. We can reach the outer planets in a fraction of the time it would take your technology. Prepare yourselves. This journey may reveal more than you expect. As they prepared to leave, Isaac found himself alone with Michael in the ship's corridor. The engineer was unusually quiet, his usual humor absent. You okay? Isaac asked. Michael shrugged, staring out a nearby viewport at the endless expanse of stars. Just thinking about home, about my family. If they're out there on some moon or station, I hope they're safe. And if they're not, they're out there, Isaac said firmly. And we're going to find them. Michael gave him a small, grateful smile. You always were the optimist. Someone has to be, Isaac replied, clapping Michael on the shoulder. The two men stood in silence for a moment longer before heading back to the operations room. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since Earth went silent, they had a direction, and with it, a glimmer of purpose. The alien vessel moved with a quiet elegance, cutting through the void of space faster than any human ship could. The outer planets loomed closer on their monitors, their hazy outlines gradually sharpening as the ship approached. Jonathan, Michael, and Isaac stood in the observation deck, the curved glass window giving them a breathtaking view of Jupiter's swirling storms. Beside them, Cyril monitored the instruments while Jail cross-referenced the trajectory data. Michael scratched his chin, his eyes fixed on the colossal gas giant. Hard to believe they could set up shop out here. I mean, it's not exactly the most hospitable neighborhood. Isaac crossed his arms, thinking aloud. If they evacuated Earth in a hurry, they might have used pre-established mining outposts or research stations, places they could modify quickly to sustain life. Jonathan nodded, turning to Cyril. What do your readings show? Any signs of large human settlements? Cyril's elongated fingers moved deftly over a panel. We are detecting faint energy signatures near Europa. They are consistent with human technology but appear shielded. It is likely they have installed energy dampeners to remain undetected. Jael interjected. We should approach carefully. If they are hiding, they might perceive any incoming vessel as a threat. Jonathan straightened. Agreed. Bring us in slow, no sudden movements. Let's not give them a reason to panic. The alien ship glided closer to Europa, its surface glinting with a thin crust of ice. The closer they got, the more details became visible. Domes buried beneath the ice, faint glows indicating a hidden city beneath the surface. Isaac stared in awe. An entire city, under the ice. If they're alive, this could be the largest human settlement outside of Earth, he murmured. Michael smirked. Looks like they managed without us. Now let's see if they'll let us in. Cyril brought the ship to a halt just outside the energy field. Jonathan opened a communication channel, his voice steady but calm. This is Captain Jonathan Pierce of the interstellar exploration vessel Pioneer. We are approaching under peaceful intent, requesting permission to make contact. A long pause followed. The crew exchanged glances, the tension palpable. Finally, a voice crackled through the channel, human and clear. This is Commander Ellen Tran of the Europa colony. We receive you, Captain. State your purpose. Jonathan glanced at Isaac before responding. We're here to understand what happened to Earth. We lost contact weeks ago and traced your energy signatures here. We mean no harm and are eager to learn what's transpired. Another pause. The crew held their breaths until the voice returned, this time softer. Understood. Lowering our field. You may dock at Bay 3. As the alien ship eased into the docking bay, the team prepared to disembark. Jonathan checked his gear while Michael adjusted a portable diagnostic device strapped to his arm. Isaac, clutching a data pad, stood at the ready, eager to meet the people they'd come so far to find. When the hatch opened, they were greeted by a group of humans clad in utilitarian suits. Commander Tran, a tall, wiry woman with streaks of gray in her hair, stepped forward. Her expression was one of cautious curiosity. Welcome to Europa Colony, she said, her voice measured. I must admit, we weren't expecting visitors from, well, anyone. Jonathan stepped forward, offering a firm handshake. Thank you, Commander Tran. It's good to see other humans again. Tran's expression softened. Likewise. Come, let's talk in the central hub. I'm sure you have questions. The central hub was a large, dome chamber carved from the ice and reinforced with metal supports. Inside, glowing panels provided a soft light, and screens displayed a variety of data, everything from colony operations to the status of the distant sun. As they walked, Michael couldn't help but marvel. This place is impressive, he said. You've managed to create a fully functioning city out here. Tran nodded. It wasn't easy, but necessity is a powerful motivator. When the solar storm hit Earth, we had no choice but to evacuate. We were fortunate to have Europa's research outposts as a starting point. Isaac leaned forward. So, Earth wasn't completely destroyed? It was just abandoned? Tran hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Earth isn't gone, but it's not habitable either. The storm knocked out every major grid, fried communication satellites, and left the surface exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. We had to move quickly to ensure humanity's survival. Europa was our best bet. Jonathan nodded. And how long have you been here? Tran sighed. Long enough to build this place up. It's not perfect, but it's home now. As they continued talking, Isaac noticed how the colony residents worked together seamlessly. Men and women of all ages operated machinery, maintained the life support systems, and collaborated on scientific projects. Despite the dire circumstances that had brought them here, there was a sense of purpose in their actions. Have you considered returning to Earth? Isaac asked. Tran shook her head. Not yet. It's not ready. And even if it were, the risk is too great without a clear plan. For now, we focus on making Europa more self-sustaining and keeping our people safe. Michael, still inspecting the colony's machinery, spoke up. We might be able to help with that. The tech on the Elixian ship is decades, no centuries, ahead of what we have. If we can adapt some of it, you could expand your infrastructure, maybe even accelerate the process of restabilizing Earth's environment. Tran looked at Michael, then at Jonathan. You'd share that technology with us? Jonathan nodded. That's why we're here. We're not just looking for answers, we're looking for ways to rebuild. Together. Tran's cautious demeanor gave way to a small smile. In that case, we might have a lot to discuss. Europa's icy corridors buzzed with activity. Engineers and technicians hurried past, hauling equipment or inputting data into consoles embedded in the colony's walls. In the command center, Isaac, Jonathan, Michael, and Commander Tran gathered around a large holographic display, showing a detailed model of the solar system. Cyril and Jael stood slightly apart, observing with quiet interest. The sun's erratic behavior caught us off guard. Tran began, pointing to the hologram. The last solar flare was unprecedented. It knocked out more than just our satellites. It destabilized atmospheric conditions on Earth. Surface temperatures spiked, radiation levels became dangerous, and we had no time to adapt. Michael leaned on the console, scanning the data. If we could stabilize the atmosphere again, maybe using some advanced shielding tech, could you see people returning home sooner rather than later? Tran folded her arms. Possibly. But even with shields, we'd need to find a way to regulate the climate, rebuild infrastructure, and ensure the radiation levels stay manageable. It's a long-term project. Jonathan turned to Cyril and Jael. What's your take? Could your technology help us fast-track the restoration? Cyril inclined his head. Our systems are designed for adaptive environmental management. With the right modifications, we could deploy units that shield Earth from the worst solar activity and assist in atmospheric stabilization. Jael added, however, implementing such systems would require cooperation from both your colony and Earth's displaced populations. Integration is key. Tran frowned. Integration is always easier said than done. Right now, we're struggling just to keep everyone on Europa fed and housed. Adding a planet-wide restoration project to our plate is ambitious. Isaac stepped in. We've come this far, Commander. If we can work together, pool our resources, I think we can make it happen. Tran considered him for a moment, her sharp eyes scanning his face. You're an optimist, aren't you? Isaac smiled faintly. It's my job. Michael snorted. Somebody's gotta be. If we leave it to the rest of us, we'd never even try. A faint smile touched Tran's lips. Fair enough. All right. Let's see what we can do. The group spent hours drafting a plan. Jael projected a 3D model of a potential shielding array, showing how it could be placed at key points in orbit around Earth. Tran brought in her top engineers to review the specifications, while Michael and Cyril discussed the power requirements and maintenance schedules. Isaac found himself caught up in the collaborative spirit, contributing ideas for coordinating communication between the colonies and any surviving Earth outposts. At one point, as they paused for a quick meal in the command center's small mess area, Isaac turned to Michael. What do you think our chances are? Michael shrugged, munching on a protein bar. Well, we've got the brains, we've got the tech, and we've got people who actually care. That's gotta count for something, right? Isaac nodded, but his thoughts lingered on the challenges ahead. He could see the determination in Jonathan's posture as the captain leaned over a console, discussing launch schedules with Tran. The captain had always been a steady presence, someone who took the long view, and Isaac found that reassuring. When the meal break ended, they returned to the planning table. Jael had refined the shielding array's design, and Tran's engineers were already suggesting modifications to integrate their existing systems. Michael proposed a step-by-step deployment plan that would allow them to test each shield before scaling up to a full planetary grid. This is going to take time, Tran said. But I'll admit it's a solid plan. Jonathan glanced at her. Then let's start now. We've got the resources here, the Elixians are willing to help, and we've got plenty of people ready to put in the work. Tran nodded. Agreed. We'll need to coordinate with the other colonies, Titan, the outer stations. They'll need to be involved too. Isaac tapped his data pad. I'll start drafting the communications. We'll need to explain the situation clearly, and show them why working together is the only way forward. Michael cracked his knuckles. Meanwhile, I'll get the hardware ready. We'll need a dedicated crew to handle assembly and maintenance. I'll train a team if I have to. Tran gave him a wry look. Careful, Smith. Once you volunteer, I'm putting you in charge of the whole operation. Michael grinned. Wouldn't have it any other way. The room seemed lighter after that, the collective mood shifting toward cautious optimism. Jonathan clapped a hand on Tran's shoulder. You're not in this alone anymore. We'll figure this out together. Tran nodded, her expression softening. It's strange, but for the first time in a while, it feels like we actually have a shot at turning things around. Isaac met Michael's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. The road ahead would be tough, no question about it. But with every voice added to their effort, every hand contributing to the work, they were finally moving forward. The machinery hummed softly as Michael and a group of engineers worked to assemble the first test unit for the shielding array. In the heart of the Europa colony's workshop, the walls were lined with shelves of tools and components, the air thick with the smell of metal and lubricants. Isaac watched from the side, his data pad in hand, reviewing specs as Michael adjusted a power coupling. You sure that connection's going to hold? Isaac asked. Michael wiped his forehead with his sleeve and grinned. You doubting me already, Isaac? Not doubting, just making sure. I'd rather not see our first test unit drift off into space because a bolt wasn't tightened properly, Isaac replied. Jonathan entered the workshop, his presence commanding immediate attention. How's it looking, Michael? Not bad, Michael said, stepping back and gesturing to the unit. We've got the framework built, the emitters are installed, and the power system's nearly done. We just need to finish wiring up the control panel. Jonathan nodded, walking around the assembly. What about the telemetry? I want to make sure we can monitor its output in real time. Already taken care of, Michael replied. We've got a direct link set up to the colony's main control room. Once it's up and running, you'll be able to track everything from there. Isaac interjected. I've been going over the alignment data. The positioning has to be precise. If we're off by even a fraction, the shields won't overlap properly, and we'll end up with gaps. Jonathan placed a hand on Isaac's shoulder. That's why you're here, Isaac. Double-check everything before we launch this thing. The last thing we need is to waste resources on a faulty deployment. One of the younger engineers approached Michael with a set of tools. Smith, we need your opinion on the stabilizers. They're vibrating more than expected during the startup tests. Michael glanced at Jonathan. Mind if I go take a look? Go, Jonathan said, waving him off. I'll catch up with Isaac. As Michael disappeared deeper into the workshop, Isaac showed Jonathan the latest calculations. I ran a simulation on the overlap zones. If we set the initial unit here, he pointed to a spot on the holographic display, we'll get the best coverage. But that's only if the other units follow this exact pattern. Jonathan studied the hologram. What's the margin for error? Less than 0.5%, Isaac said. We'll need to run a final check before launch, but if we stick to this plan, we should be fine. Jonathan rubbed his chin. And if we're not? Isaac sighed. If we're not, we adjust. But I think we'll be fine. Between Michael's engineering and the data from Cyril and jail, we've got a solid shot. Just as they finished reviewing the plan, Michael returned, his hands dusty but a satisfied grin on his face. Stabilizers are sorted. They just needed a slight recalibration. Jonathan smirked. You're like a mechanic for the universe, Smith. Keep it up. Michael laughed. Someone's got to keep this place running. Might as well be me. The three men worked side by side for hours, fine-tuning every detail. They reviewed the schematics, checked the power flow, and tested the control panel. Isaac handled the calculations, Michael tackled the hardware, and Jonathan ensured the team stayed on track. When they finally stepped back, the first shielding unit stood ready, a sleek, sturdy structure that gleamed under the workshop lights. Michael crossed his arms, admiring their handiwork. Looks good. I'd say she's ready for a test flight. Isaac nodded, satisfied. Let's take her up. The sooner we get this thing into orbit, the sooner we can see if our plan holds water. Jonathan clapped Michael on the back. Great work, everyone. Let's get it loaded onto the shuttle. Time to see if all this effort pays off. As the team prepared to move the unit, Cyril and Jael arrived, their movements as fluid as ever. Cyril addressed Jonathan, his tone measured. We've reviewed your assembly process. The design is sound, and we believe it will function as intended. However, the first test will be critical. Success here will set the precedent for future deployments. Jonathan nodded. Understood. We'll proceed carefully. Jael added, if there are any anomalies, our ship systems can analyze them immediately and provide solutions. Isaac raised an eyebrow. That'll come in handy. Thanks, Jael. Michael gave a thumbs up. Let's get this thing into orbit. They worked together to transport the shielding unit to the launch bay, where it was carefully loaded onto a shuttle. The hangar buzzed with activity as technicians double-checked connections and secured the payload. Jonathan oversaw the operation, issuing commands and ensuring everyone knew their roles. As the shuttle prepared to launch, Isaac, Michael, and Jonathan stood side by side, watching through the observation window. The engines roared to life, and the shuttle rose smoothly, disappearing into the dark expanse of space. Michael crossed his arms, a satisfied expression on his face. There she goes. Fingers crossed it works. Jonathan smirked. No crossing fingers. We've done our homework. It'll work. Isaac chuckled. Spoken like a true optimist, Captain. The three men watched until the shuttle was out of sight, then turned back to their stations. There was still work to be done, data to analyze and future deployments to plan. But for now, they had taken the first step toward rebuilding what had been lost. The control room on Europa hummed with anticipation. Screens flickered with incoming data as the shielding unit reached its designated orbit. Michael, Isaac, and Jonathan stood clustered around a central terminal, their eyes fixed on the live feed from the shuttle's onboard cameras. The unit was now fully deployed, a gleaming structure suspended against the backdrop of the vastness of space. Telemetry's coming through, Michael said, his voice calm but tinged with excitement. He tapped a console, bringing up a series of graphs and status indicators. Power flows stable. The emitters are running at full efficiency. Jonathan folded his arms and leaned forward. What about alignment? Are we seeing any interference? Isaac adjusted his datapad, pulling up the positioning reports. So far, everything's holding. The shield's coverage is right on target. No gaps, no overlaps. It's working. The room let out a collective breath of relief. Engineers murmured to each other, and technicians exchanged nods of approval. The unit's successful deployment was the first tangible step in a project that had seemed almost impossible weeks ago. Commander Tran entered the room, her expression unreadable as she approached the trio. How's it looking? Jonathan turned to her. Solid. The unit's stable, and we're already seeing the shield's effect on solar radiation levels. Tran glanced at the data on Isaac's screen. What's the timeline for the next unit? Michael answered, we'll need about a week to replicate the process. That includes fabrication, calibration, and testing. Once we get into a rhythm, we can streamline production. But we need to monitor this one for a full cycle before we commit to launching the next. Tran nodded. Makes sense. I'll keep the council informed. They'll want to know we're making progress. As she left the room, Michael leaned against the console, rubbing the back of his neck. One down, a dozen more to go. We've got our work cut out for us. Isaac nudged him with a grin. You didn't think this would be easy, did you? Michael smirked. Oh, I knew it would be a grind. But it's nice to know the grind is actually paying off. Jonathan cleared his throat. Let's not celebrate just yet. We need to run continuous diagnostics. If this thing fails, we need to know why, and fast. The next few hours were a flurry of activity. The team rotated shifts, each member focusing on a different aspect of the project. Michael handled the hardware checks, ensuring the unit's physical structure remained intact. Isaac monitored the data streams, looking for any anomalies in the shield's coverage. Jonathan oversaw the entire operation, keeping everyone on track and ensuring communication between the colony and the alien delegation remained smooth. Late into the evening, as the control room quieted down, Michael and Isaac found themselves alone at one of the terminals. Isaac was poring over a set of figures, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Still worried about the alignment?" Michael asked, sitting beside him and grabbing a protein bar from his pocket. "Always," Isaac replied, not looking up. "If the alignment shifts even a little, we'll lose coverage over the critical zones. I'm trying to figure out if we can automate some of the adjustments to save time." Michael took a bite of his protein bar, chewing thoughtfully. "Back on Earth, I used to rebuild classic cars. Sometimes the problem wasn't the alignment itself, it was the way the parts fit together. You fix the underlying structure, the alignment holds naturally." Isaac finally looked up, intrigued. "What are you suggesting?" "Maybe we're overcomplicating it," Michael said. "Instead of constantly tweaking the output, we reinforce the base configuration. Make it sturdy enough that small variations don't throw the whole thing off." Isaac tilted his head, considering the idea. "You might be onto something. If we can stabilize the frame before launch, we can minimize the need for corrections in orbit." Michael grinned. "Now you're thinking like a mechanic." Jonathan joined them just as Isaac and Michael were sketching out their new approach. He leaned over the table, scanning their notes. "What's this?" "A simpler solution," Michael said. "If we reinforce the unit before launch, we can reduce in-flight adjustments. It should make the whole process smoother." Jonathan tapped the table. "Sounds good. Run it by Cyril and Jael. If they're on board, we'll incorporate it into the next launch." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You trust those two that much?" Jonathan shrugged. "They've been right so far. No reason to second-guess them now." Isaac and Michael spent the next few hours refining their plans, discussing every detail. The workshop was quiet, save for the occasional clatter of tools as they prepared for the next unit. Despite the late hour, neither of them showed signs of stopping. "This is what it's all about," Michael said, tightening a bolt on the mock-up they'd assembled. "Figuring out the problems, finding solutions, and actually seeing it work." Isaac chuckled. I never thought I'd miss the long nights in the lab back on Earth. But this feels different." Michael nodded, standing back and wiping his hands. "Because it matters. We're not just fixing a car. We're fixing the future." Jonathan walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed them over with a small grin. "Thought you two could use a pick-me-up. Don't push yourselves too hard. We've still got a lot to do." Michael took the coffee with a grin. "Captain, you're a lifesaver." Isaac sipped his coffee and glanced at Jonathan. "What about you? When's the last time you slept?" Jonathan waved him off. "I'll sleep when we've got the next unit ready to go." Michael laughed. "I knew you'd say that." The 3 of them stayed in the workshop, talking through ideas and working late into the night. Their camaraderie made the work lighter, their determination stronger. By the time the next morning rolled around, they were ready to put their new plan into action. The workshop's once constant hum had stilled. Instead, it was the hum of anticipation filling the space as Jonathan, Michael, and Isaac stood shoulder to shoulder in the command room. On the main monitor, an image of Earth rotated slowly, a sight that had once been routine, now alien in its silence. Though distant, it was a goal growing steadily more real. Jonathan leaned forward, hands braced on the console. "We've got 3 units deployed and stable. The shield grid is forming exactly as planned. What's our next step?" Isaac adjusted his tablet, scrolling through streams of data. "The 4th unit will complete the initial orbital ring. Once that's in place, we'll start seeing more tangible results. Lowered radiation levels, stabilized atmospheric readings. After that, it's a matter of maintaining the grid and gradually introducing larger colonies back to the surface." Michael snorted, tapping a wrench against the edge of the console. "You make it sound easy, like we're setting up a backyard grill instead of rebuilding a planet." Jonathan shot him a quick smile. "One step at a time, Smith. It might be a big backyard, but the principle's the same." Commander Tran joined them, her voice cutting through the conversation. Captain, we've just received the final adjustments from Cyril and Jail. They're recommending a slight shift in the positioning of the fourth unit, half a degree closer to the equatorial band. Apparently, it'll improve the overall efficiency by 3%. Michael raised an eyebrow. 3% doesn't sound like much. Tran gave him a sharp look. 3% when you're talking about the entire planet is significant. We're going to need every fraction we can get if we're going to make Earth livable again. Michael held up his hands in mock surrender. Fair enough. Let's get it done. Jonathan turned back to the team. Smith, coordinate with the crew to make the adjustments. Isaac, run one more simulation to confirm the new alignment. Tran, I need you to keep the council updated. Let them know this is our final tweak before launch. Tran nodded. Understood. Michael headed to the launch bay to oversee the crew making the modifications. Isaac stayed behind, running the simulations. The control room quieted again except for the soft beeps of the equipment. Jonathan stood behind Isaac, watching the screen as the simulation completed. Well? Jonathan asked. Isaac nodded slowly. It checks out. The adjustment will help. Jonathan clapped a hand on Isaac's shoulder. Good work. A few hours later, the team gathered in the observation deck to watch the launch. The fourth unit had been mounted on the shuttle, its reinforced frame reflecting the colony's bright overhead lights. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, Isaac and Michael stood side by side, their expressions a mixture of pride and nervous energy. Think this one will work as smoothly as the last? Michael asked, leaning against the rail. Isaac smirked. You know what they say, third time's the charm. Fourth time's just showing off. Michael chuckled, shaking his head. Let's hope you're right. The shuttle climbed into the darkness, the colony's inhabitants watching intently as the ship disappeared from sight. Back in the command room, the team monitored its progress. Isaac watched the readouts, calling out updates as the shuttle approached its destination. Positioning complete, he said. Powering up the unit now. The room tensed as they waited. On the main screen, the shielding unit activated, its emitters glowing faintly. Data flowed in, confirming that the grid was fully connected and functional. Cheers erupted from the technicians and engineers in the background. Even Jonathan cracked a rare smile. We did it, he said. Phase 1 is complete. Tran joined them, her expression more serious but still tinged with satisfaction. This is just the beginning. If we can maintain this stability, we can start talking about resettlement. But that's going to take time, and we'll need everyone working together. Michael crossed his arms, staring at the monitor. It's been a hell of a ride, but we're not done yet. Jonathan turned to the team, his gaze steady. No, we're not done, but we've taken a giant step forward. Now it's about keeping that momentum and making sure the next steps go just as smoothly. Isaac leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself a moment to relax. At least now we know it's possible. That's more than we had when we started. Michael glanced at him. That's true. But it's not just about knowing it's possible. It's about making it happen. Over and over again until we get it right. Jonathan smiled faintly. Then I guess it's a good thing we're stubborn. The three of them exchanged glances, a shared understanding passing between them. The road ahead would still be long, but now they had a clear direction, and with each step they were getting closer to bringing humanity back home.